The information shared on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. While we discuss topics related to mental health, well-being, and emotional support, we are not providing therapy or medical services. Always seek the advice of your physician, psychologist, psychiatrist, or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a mental health condition. If you are in crisis, feeling unsafe, or need immediate support, please contact a mental health professional or emergency services in your area. The views expressed by guests and hosts are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of any affiliated organizations or institutions.
Get inspired, get motivated with M.A.Y.A and the M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition podcast.
Something that I take pride in is trying to be forward thinking outside the box, challenging myself. And as I challenge myself, hopefully I challenge you.
Find M.A.Y.A on Twitter and Instagram at M.A.Y.A_Akai. On Facebook at M.A.Y.A Akai Presents.
We're going to talk health, wealth, fitness, mental health, financial, lots of different things that can empower you as you seek out the ambition that you're pursuing.
Or get everything M.A.Y.A at M.A.Y.A_Akai.com.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome to another episode of M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. Today, we're diving into a very important topic. What story is your life telling about you? Does it feel authentic? Does it align with what you have envisioned in your life? Well, our guest today on this episode of M.A.Y.A, Shannon Presson, is going to guide us, help us to look through a different lens to analyze our lives as more than just being the main characters of our lives, but think about being more so of the writer, the editor, the architect of what is being said about you. So if you are a first-time listener or viewer, I always just say, buckle up for safety, because it could be an unexpected bumpy ride with the realizations or the epiphanies that you might have about your life. And of course, if you're a returning listener or viewer, as always, thank you. Appreciate your support. And you know that we take the next 45, 50 minutes. They're all about you. So find that quiet spot. I always say grab pen and paper, a beverage of your choice. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. And let's dive into this. So our guest today, Shannon Presson, is an author, speaker, but more importantly, she's a storyteller. And as a storyteller, I can confidently say she has mastered the power of telling the story. Shannon helps people understand life has more than just one narrative that can be written. And let's be honest, most of us are familiar with probably 3 of them. We're going to talk about the challenge story, what's not working, the dream story, what we want instead of what we have, and the oh yeah, but story, all the reasons why we think we can't have it. These are the stories that many of us tend to recycle constantly in our lives. And I'm going to admit this, probably even in spaces that are designed to help you, like therapy. You might journal, or you might be using some self-help options. Well, the key thing is that Shannon Presson wrote The Unexpected Story, and that book reveals the narrative that most people have never considered. What comes next story, because that is the story. It's the 4th story, and it is the one you didn't write, you can't control, and we know how we don't like not having control, and likely haven't been taught to even identify or recognize it. It's been there the whole time, quietly shaping your life, holding a vision of you that's larger than anything that you've ever planned. So without further ado, let's welcome to the M.A.Y.A stage, Shannon Presson. Hello, Shannon. Welcome to M.A.Y.A. How are you?
Oh, I'm terrific. Thank you so much for having me on, M.A.Y.A. And what a great introduction. You covered my entire plan. We can go now and have that 5 o'clock drink.
Ooh, that sounds good. A glass of wine makes everything better, right? No, but I'm going to tell you something. What you do in the story, I'm going to even say this. When you reached out and they had, mentioned you being a guest, I read, your bio and everything. And I said to myself, I talk about this a lot in therapy, but honestly, not from this necessarily perspective. I've just never framed it that way. So even for me, you actually got me to open my eyes and see things a bit differently. So, with that being said, for anybody, if you're listening to this and you happen to have that aha moment and you want to throw a question out there, remember, you can always join the conversation, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. All you have to do is put your comments into the comment sections or the chat sections in YouTube or Facebook, and I can then read it. I'll make sure it's appropriate what you're going to ask our guests, because we like to be appropriate here. And I can share it and we can expand on it and go from there. So when you have that aha moment, guess what? You don't have to have it by yourself. You can throw the question at Shannon and we can try to answer it and go from there. So remember, we like to be integrative here. So, okay, let's dive into, I named this episode, What Story is Your Life Telling About You? Because I honestly believe, Shannon, a lot of people are not the architects of their story. They kind of are living a life based on what other people have provided. I always say to a lot of people, we enter into the world as a blank slate. We don't, and we're often then shaped by views of our family, our parents, culture, society, things of that nature. And it's progressive over time. So I always say we have a unique ecosystem that begins with family and expands over time. And so hence, a lot of times people don't take real ownership of the paths they choose to walk. So when you talk about there are 4 stories that shape every life, most people are probably like, there's 4 stories shaping my life. I never would have thought that. How did you arrive at this destination about the 4 stories? What's your journey to this point?
So I think it kind of came for me. When you talk about we come into life as a blank slate, one of the things that I carried all through my childhood was this question of, is this it? It was this really weird question. It was very hard to frame as an 8-year-old, like to ask such an existential question. Is this it? Is this all there is about life? And so I've always been curious. I've always been someone who's been very self-examined, I guess would be a good word for it. But about 15 years ago, in my previous life, I was a corporate event planner. I spent 20 years traveling around the world for a very well-known company doing event planning. It was my dream story, literally. It was what I always wanted to do. And when I turned 50, I pretty much burnt out. And you and I had an earlier conversation about menopause, but I crashed so hard that I literally woke my husband up in the middle of the night one night and said, I'm dying. And he, bless his heart, in a very sleepy tone, said, is that what you want? And I said, no. And so he said, well, what are you going to do about it? And that was the first question that came to my mind, which is, what is it that I'm really challenged with right now? And for me, it was, I didn't have a dream. I had lived my whole dream. And now my body was saying that dream is no longer possible. And I know a lot of your listeners, if they're at that stage of midlife, come to that place where they recognize that, is this it? Is this our life? I've done all the things that I thought I was supposed to do. And now here I am, and what's next? So somewhere along the line, I got into coaching, and I was trying to build a coaching practice, and I had hired a business coach, and he kept telling me to shorten my story. Like just get to the point. I don't need the whole story. And I was so frustrated because it was a comment I had gotten my whole life. Like just get to the point. Stop with the storytelling, which is really hard because I am a born storyteller. And so after one of our calls, I got off and I was feeling very frustrated. You know, that sense where you have where no one's listening to you and you're trying to make a point and no one gets it. So I started thinking about the stories and what were the stories inside me that really needed to be examined. And so I realized that there were these 3 stories, right? The challenge story. Where are we? What's not working? The dream story. The second story, well, if it was exactly the way I wanted it to be, what would it look like? What would it sound like? What would it feel like? And then the third story, which most of us are familiar with, is the yeah, but story. So yeah, I could have what I want, but, and there's always this but, and the but is a very multi-level issue, because one of the things that I did learn about this process of going through and examining stories is that every story we tell serves a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Even the ones that we don't want to tell, or the ones we've told so often we're bored with them, if we are continuing to tell that story is serving us. And one of the questions that I always ask my clients is, what does that story get for you? And that's a very challenging question when you're at the but story. But as I began to work with these 3 stories, I realized that there was a 4th story. And it was kind of a unicorn because it doesn't have anything, it's not in my control. It comes through synchronicity. It comes through signs. It comes through that phone call from that person you weren't expecting to run into, who just calls you out of the blue, or the book, the stereotypical book falls on your head in the bookstore. You see a billboard. There, Robert Moss calls them the 3 if onlys. It's just a dream. It's only coincidence. It's only synchronicity. And we discount them. And we say, oh, if, that's not the truth. But here's the thing. The unexpected story, as I began to look at it in my own life, is the story that my soul carries, that knows the journey, so to speak. And it's interesting, it's not a pushy soul. Your soul, the universe itself, the divine, whatever you want to call it, is very neutral. So if you say, I want to go out and learn how to drive race cars, the universe says yes. And then you say, I'm scared of race cars, and the universe says yes. So it keeps giving you that yes, regardless of what the thing is. But when we allow what wants to happen, and I'll give you the perfect example. I wrote this book. I began to write the book, The Unexpected Story, about 12 years ago. And I wrote the first 20,000 words based originally on this experience of identifying these 4 stories. And I was so bored with it, I didn't even want to read it. So it was like, okay, everything was there. All the information was there. Totally said what I wanted it to say. And it was like, who cares? So I threw it in a box. And then I threw notes on top of it. And then I threw stickies and I threw vision boards. And I had this crate, literally, that I carried around. And about 6 years ago, when we renovated our house, I found this box. And it was like, all right, what do I do with it? So I carried it around, right? We carry around burdens,
Carry around. Mm-hmm.
Carry them around. And about 3 years ago, I was talking to my dear friend Elizabeth, who did write the foreword for my book, and she's an extraordinary healer. And I told her, I don't know what to do. Should I do it? Is this my path? Is this what the universe wants for me? And she said, Shannon, the universe doesn't care. It doesn't care if you write the book. It doesn't care if you don't write the book.
True.
But here's my question. How will you feel if you don't write the book? And I took a deep breath and I kind of felt into it. And I said, I will feel like my heart is broken. And she goes, what? There's your answer, right? You write the book.
You're writing the book.
Okay. So, now we have a plan. So I put together a proposal. I get myself a publisher. I get myself a contract. I sit down, classic stereotype of a writer. Every day for 4 hours, I would stare at the screen. I would cry. I would doodle. I would play solitaire. Nothing came. The first 20,000 words were the book. That's what I had. I hated it. So about 6 months into this, I started to panic, like, oh my God, I have to write this book. So I hired a book doula. That's what I call her, someone who helps you birth the book. And I said, all I want you to do is every 2 weeks, read what I wrote and ask me questions. Like, read what I wrote and what's the question that comes up for you. So we had a 6-month contract. At the last session of this 6-month contract, I am now a year into this contract with the publisher, right? And she says to me, she said, there's a paragraph on the last chapter, and it's about a woman who has done her work. And I know as a therapist, you can really resonate to this. She's done her work. She's cleared this path. She's faced her traumas. She's done the deep excavation. And she is in a no story, that she cannot get past. No matter what she does, no matter where she goes, all she gets is no. And so she finds herself on this island, and it becomes the pause. And she surrenders and she says, I have no idea what to do next. So I am, as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to let go and let God. I have no idea what to do next. So my book doula said, her, I want to know about her. Like, shit, I don't know who she is. Pardon my language. So anyway, we end our contract, and I'm sitting at my desk. My husband's watching a football game one Sunday afternoon, and I thought, all right, fine. Who is she? I'll write her backstory. And I sat down at the computer and I said, where did you come from? And all of a sudden, the door opened. And this is the point I want to make about the unexpected story, because this book literally is the personification of the unexpected story, because I sat down and I said, all right, I am not going to write the book I think I'm supposed to write. I am going to write whatever wants to be written. And within the space of 6 months, I had written this basically 2-part book. The first part is a fable about a very young girl named Lumina who sets off to find the place she truly belongs. And then the second part of the book is a reader's guide called The Dragonfly Path for women and men who want to take this exploration, this path for themselves. And when you were talking earlier, M.A.Y.A, you said something about we're born as a blank slate. And one of the premises of the fable is that when Lumina was born, she knew her magic. She came into the world, but it was taken away from her through her family, through her culture, through her ancestral stories. And so a big part of this journey for her is to find where it went, to reclaim the magic that is her birthright, that blank slate piece. And so there's 3 things that she's given, because it's a magical fable. So, right, we always have to have the gifts. So her mentor gives her 3 things. She gives her a compass. He actually gives her a compass, and he tells her that this compass will only point true north when she follows her heart. So when she follows her heart, right, how will you feel if you don't write the book? The compass will accurately point in the correct path. The second gift she's given is a lantern. And the lantern will dim when she forgets who she is, when she forgets her truth, when she forgets her magic, but will blaze gloriously when she remembers and she connects. And the third piece, the third gift that she receives is a puzzle box, and there's no picture. And her mentor tells her that she must explore and experiment and even err before she can understand how all the pieces fit together. And in doing so, she will not only understand the picture, but come to understand herself as well. And so the journey that she takes is very intertwined with these 3 gifts. And in the end, which I won't spoil alert.
Nope, don't spoil it, right?
There's a generational connection that says when we do our work, we not only heal back, we not only heal our ancestors, but we heal going forward. So the work that we do is so powerful, not just for us,
for others moving forward.
Yeah.
And this is a good read, because for me, why that story is unexpected and the what comes next, and why it's harder to see, because look at the tools that she had to be given to be able to have that discovery. But for instance, we talked about those, I mentioned the 3 stories that everybody is so familiar with and can easily fall in line with. So let's talk about those other stories, because there's four, and we talked about the fourth, but let's talk about the other three that most people tend to get stuck in, like the challenge story, the what's not working, and people can get caught into this loop and not seem to escape it.
So I think the challenge story obviously the challenge story and the dream story are very much intertwined with the but story. The challenge story really is the truth of where we are in this moment. And there's a part in the book that talks about presence and perception. So when we begin to really stay present and perceive what we're perceiving and be aware of what our experience is in this moment, we can look at the challenge story not as a personal indictment of our own particular failures, perhaps, but as simply a mirror reflecting back a path or a map that we have created. Um, I've certainly had plenty of challenges in my life, and some of them, I was a byproduct of. I mean, my family was a challenge, but I didn't do anything other than get born into that family. And so the challenge for me was to look at the map and the language I had created that identified what that family meant about me, right?
Yes. And that's a good point to that people I think struggle with. Just because you're born into something doesn't mean you have to stay. And the challenge within itself is to break those bonds, those ties, those generational traumas and behaviors that many people carry forward without thinking it makes no sense. Which you said something and started talking about the challenge story. To me, the challenge story often negates the dream story, what we really want instead, but we're so stuck in the challenge story, we don't know how to move that marker forward to take that dream and make it more than just a story.
Yeah, and I think to that point, and we were talking earlier about human design. I think one of the things I love about human design is it talks about the personality versus the design. So if you come from a metaphysical place, which is really, kind of near and dear to my heart, our soul chooses this moment in time to come into a body, right? So the soul has a purpose. It has things to learn. The school of earth, so to speak. And so it says, oh, in my case, Jack and Doris in East Orange, New Jersey. Yeah, that looks a good idea. I can learn a lot if I join that family, So God and I, we shake our hands, I get down in there, and then it's like, oh God, okay, now I'm in the body, right? So the soul has a purpose, but the vehicle is our body, is our history, is our design, is our challenges, because the soul wants to learn. So it picks things, right? So exactly to your point, just because you're born into a family doesn't mean that is your destiny. It could very well mean that that is the exact challenge that you need in order to become your truest self. So my family was all about self-worth. And so my soul, I think, truly wanted to ground self-worth in this lifetime. So it put me in a family that said, you're not worth anything unless you fulfill a certain requirement or you are a certain thing. So that piece of the challenge story that you're talking about, the yeah, but story is that thread that locks them together, because the yeah, but story says, well, I can't have my dream story because this is what I was born into and this is who I'm stuck at. Right?
Mhm. Yes. Yes. And it's like the yeah, but you're right. It's probably people oscillating between that challenge story and that dream story, not seeing that there is an out. If they
Yeah.
think beyond just because you were born with something doesn't mean you have to maintain, if especially if it does not resonate with something you just said, your soul, because the soul
Right.
is an individual thing that belongs uniquely to you and not others. So when we
Absolutely.
choose to maybe bind it to things that don't fit, hence the challenge probably seems greater. So, okay. So when we talk about looking at those three stories, everybody right now can hear that. Where are you sitting right now? And what is your life telling the story about you? Are you sitting in your challenge story? Everything that happens is a challenge. You can't seem to move the needle. Are you stuck in believing the dream story where it's just a dream and you don't believe that you can actualize it and make it happen? Or are you standing there looking at these two things and are you saying, yeah, but where are you in all this? Because it's about getting you to that unexpected story, which I mentioned in the opening is not in your control. You know, people don't like that, not to be able to control something. We often definitely don't know how to recognize it for sure because most people haven't given us those tools. So when we talk about the unexpected story, what comes next? A good salient question turns into, okay, well, we all live inside stories we didn't consciously choose. So how can someone begin to recognize something that was, let's just say, written on their blank slate as they came into the world?
So I think the concept of presence and the concept of perception, so they're four pillars that I talk about in the book: presence, perception, sovereignty, and nourishment. And presence is that recognition of where am I in this moment in time? What is present in this moment? We tend to live in the past, project out into the future. So a big part of it is to stay in this moment. What is true for me in this moment? And how do I perceive, and how am I perceived? And gosh, I don't want anybody who's listening to this think that cultural influence, peer pressure, family pressure, ancestral stories does not play a huge part in how we draw the map of our life. So it's not just one of the things that was real big in it's like manifestation. You
Mhm.
make the vision board and you wake up every day and you say,
Yes.
I'm wealthy beyond my wildest
No,
dreams.
you're not.
And in the back of your mind, you go, no, I got 12 cents in your checking account. Who are you kidding? You
Right.
know, your brain, your
Right.
brain will, your brain will not accept a lie. Okay. So this is not about lying to yourself. This is about looking at what is true for you in this moment and then asking the question, how am I constructing the map in my mind that's taking me on the path that I am wanting to travel or that I am not wanting to travel? Language is one of the most
Oh,
powerful
powerful.
spells,
Yes.
powerful
Yes.
spells, powerful map making tools. And I'll tell you a beautiful story. I mentioned earlier that I was in Africa. I just came back. And one of the things that occurred to me when I was sitting on my little deck in Botswana overlooking the Delta, and I had this moment of recognition that said, if you want a different future going forward, you have to create a new language. That the language that you've used up until this moment has got you right here. But
Yes.
if you want to go further, you need a new language. And so I'm writing my journal and I'm making all these notes. And so I just shouted out to the Delta. It's like, great. If you want me to have a new language, give me a word. True story. We're sitting at M.A.Y.A River Lodge, which is right on the banks of the Zambezi, which is an amazing river system in Zimbabwe. And our server, who was with us every day, Johnson, just a beautiful man, he came up to us in the morning and he said, so what's on the agenda today? And I said, oh, we're going to Victoria Falls. We're going to have a little sightseeing trip. And he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, oh, you're about to be baptized by the mighty Zambezi. And my brain went, that's the word. That's the word. And this is the baptized,
Baptized. Okay.
baptized. So this is where we begin to pull the unexpected story in, because I asked for new language. I said, I want my life to be more expanded, more delicious, more amazing. I don't know what that looks like. I am open to all possibilities. What is it that I need to do? And what I felt inside me was, well, you need to change your language. You need a new language
Hmm.
to create a new map. And so I said, okay, but how do I find a new language? Show me. And that's part of the unexpected story, is to open your heart, to open yourself and say, I do not have to know how this works. I just have to ask the question with an open heart in a state of grace.
And that's the key thing. It's about asking the question and then sitting back and listening. And besides the fact of just The language piece, which I constantly talk to people about, the way you choose to craft, I often say, a story or narrative in your mind is how you're going to probably react to it. So if you tell yourself that it's going to be an argument or a confrontation, you're already setting that idea in your head in motion. So when you approach that person, that's often what's going to happen, because that's the language that you use versus saying, I have to have a difficult conversation with someone. But when you say it's going to be an argument or a confrontation, you're already kind of heading down that path. But you said something earlier that I kind of want to pull back in, is that, and I think it was good to note that regardless to which your family background, culture, those are not necessarily negative things. I felt like you were speaking to people about those core principles that often shape our lives. It's the starting point of information we're given to begin to shape how we think and how we feel. But the question turns into, and when you told me your story about how for you at a very young age, when you realized that the story that was being written for you did not resonate or align with who you wanted to be. And if I want to say this, you were quite insightful at 16, Shannon, because most people at 16 have no clue that the family they're looking at is a detriment to them, and it's not going to help them elevate, because there's always this sense of loyalty to patterns or identities that either are not healthy or do not fit. How do people reconcile those things? How do they begin to identify that?
Well, I mean, I wish I could say, do this, do this, do this. There's a 4-point, system to doing that. And as a therapist, that change is organic,
Mhm.
that we hold a desire. And I think the desire is very connected to the unexpected story. So if I hold a desire, and I have been this way my whole life, I wanted to be paid to travel when I was in my school years. That was a big dream of mine, to be paid to travel. And I didn't want to be a flight attendant because that seemed like a lot of hard work. So I didn't really know what being paid to travel would be like. And so I went about my life doing all the things that I thought I should do based on my family and the culture at the time. You got a secretarial job. My mother was a secretary. Her biggest admonition to me was, always learn how to type so you can always get a job. So of course I absolutely refused to learn how to type because I don't want to
Like,
turn into my mother. So yeah. And then I wound up,
that's
turning into
fair.
my
That's
mother.
fair.
So, so the first place for all of us is to begin to, I think, go back to those 4 principles I mentioned, one around presence, perception, and sovereignty. The biggest one that I work with when I work with my clients is around sovereignty. And sovereignty is about believing and understanding and owning that you are, in fact, the ruler of your own kingdom, right? That you have the power to raise or lower the drawbridge of your kingdom, and no one gets to cross that drawbridge without your permission. And I think of the 4 principles, sovereignty is the hardest one for women because we live in a culture that says we don't matter, that we don't count, that our rights aren't sovereign. And so to hold that sovereignty sometimes feels like you're pushing against the tide, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all. And I've worked very, very hard to practice what I preach,
Mhm.
so to speak. So the first place I think for all of us is to look at where we give ourselves away. Um, you know, I, when I worked with women in business, one of the
Mhm.
things that women were constantly doing was undercharging or giving away services, or they would have a list of services and someone
Mhm.
would call up and they'd say, "Oh, can I have it for less?" Or without even asking, "Oh, let me give you the friends and family discount," without them even asking if they
That
wanted a
that
discount.
part right there. That part right there. The people will attempt to undermine you. And sometimes I don't
Right.
think it's always intentional. Sometimes people
No.
just have an idea in their head of what they want, not seeing that it might be undermining someone else. So there's 2 things that you said to me that stand out when you talk about trying to identify or recognize that unexpected story. One, if you don't value yourself, the story is going to be missing a whole lot because you don't
Sure.
even value yourself enough to know what's missing. And the
Sure.
second piece, that I feel you said that's big too, to help know there's an unexpected story that needs to be written. You're yearning for something more. Life as you know it does not seem fulfilling. And that could be for the person who thinks they have it all, but then say to themselves, but I'm just not happy. Something is missing.
Right.
So, and
Exactly.
and when you talked about, you said something, another thing that I think is interesting when you talked about your time in Africa, which I can't wait to go. I'm so excited. The more people tell their stories, the more it just makes me, I can't wait to be there. But when you talked about that encounter with Johnson, that is something I always tell people, that I feel the universe drops you nuggets all the time.
All the time.
People just don't
All the
have their eyes
time.
open to see it
Mhm.
because they're looking for something else. And I say sometimes a person will come into your life, that very cliche saying, for a reason or a season, whatever it is. And some people are so locked into a certain mindset, they don't even see the opportunity to learn or grow that was right in front of them. That someone could have said something that could be the thing that moves the needle for you. But if you're not constantly keeping your heart and your mind open, we miss so many opportunities that sit right in front of us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's actually it's been documented. I think it was Stanford. You might be familiar with the experiment where they had people watch the TV screen and they were told to watch they were tossing the ball back and forth and
Oh,
they were
mhm.
told to watch, the people in the red shirts and the people in the blue shirts and count the number of times they passed the ball. And somewhere in this process, a guy in a gorilla suit walks across the screen, stops, and then walks off. And something like 62% of the people never saw the gorilla because their brains were looking for the thing that they were looking for. And that's, we have this reticular activating system in our brain, and the sole circus of the ARS is to filter the hundreds of thousands of bits of information we'll bombard it with every second of the day and filter out what's important. And how does the RAS know what's important? It's based on our emotions. So our emotions impact what our brain filters for. And
Mhm.
anybody who's ever thought about buying a new car, oh my God, I'm going to get myself a new Prius. And then the next thing you see is like every car is a Prius because
Bingo.
your brain has said this is important.
And yes.
And it goes back to your original question. How do we begin to come home to our own sovereignty? How do we begin to shift that story? Is to begin to look at the story we're telling and what's the emotion that that story is creating with us. It's
Mhm. So, one of the things that pops in my head is that if we're trying to figure out how to identify, to be able to write our unexpected story, how would you say people, and maybe we've kind of said it, but I want to hear your thought on it. How do we know, how can a person discern that the life they're living is the life they really want versus it's not the life they really want? Because a lot of people are very conflicted in being able to identify that. Like, well, am I just going through the motions of this life? Or is this really the life that I want? How can people discern the difference between the two?
Well, I would say that you as a therapist probably have a lot more experience with this than I do. Clients that come to me are kind of like they have made the decision that this is not the
Okay.
life they signed up for. So
Okay.
um, I know for myself personally, about 5 years ago, I hit one of those benchmark moments when I looked at my professional life and I realized that I had created a life for myself that was so counter what I believed was what I wanted. That I had agreed to so many things that were basically soul sucking, time sucking, and money sucking, and were not contributing in any way, shape, or form to
Right.
the quality of my life. And in a radical move, I literally picked up the phone and called everybody I knew and canceled everything. I stepped away from the presidency of an organization. I stepped away from my client. I mean, I literally just walked out the door and said, I'm done. And I hired a therapist because I absolutely believe that therapy is one of the finest gifts that you can give yourself ever.
Hmm.
And I worked with this amazing therapist, and she said, I'm your fairy godmother. She said, I can grant you what wish. What do you want? And I
Ah,
said, I want a do over. And I didn't realize at the time, I thought it was a professional do-over. I thought that I just wanted to learn how to create a better career for myself.
Mhm.
And what I realized was I was actually asking, how do I do my entire life over? Because
Ooh.
I had set up so many scenarios unconsciously. And one of the scenarios that I had set up was with my husband. Um, I had created a relationship where because I grew up in a family who said you don't have value unless you're of service, unless you provide service, unless you are useful to us, so to speak, that I decided that I would carry that along into my relationship with my husband. And so I set up this scenario where all he had to do was go to work, come home, eat dinner, go to bed. And I would do everything because I thought that if I was of service to him, then I would always be useful and the marriage would be secure. And it turns out that that is not the way to secure a marriage, because I internally just went, I can't do this anymore. And so it was this wake up moment when I realized I wasn't asking for a do over on my work. I was asking a do over on everything. And that was when my therapist pointed out to me how these unconscious stories that I've been carrying my whole life, that were defining me and were playing out over and over and over again, had set up behaviors that were not to my advantage, but were literally, and I call them gatekeepers in the book. I talk a lot about the gatekeepers, that the story that I taught myself as a child kept me safe. It,
Mm.
it, 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 it protected me to
Mhm.
the ability to get my needs met, to keep a roof over my head, to get food, to get, whatever security I could secure. And these stories go into our unconscious and they become the gatekeepers. And every morning, Maya, you open your eyes and those little gatekeepers say, "Hey, Maya, are you still alive?" And you go, "Hell yeah." And they go, "Awesome, we're doing a good job." And so when we decide it's time to change our lives, those gatekeepers don't just go, "Okay, yeah, see ya." They dig in and they say, "You know what? We've been protecting you our entire lives, and we're not about to let go just because you think you have a new way of being in life."
And that aligns with something when I was reading some of the things you sent me, why insight alone doesn't create change. And that's one of the things I say in therapy. We can talk about things till we're blue in the face, but if there's not an action oriented plan about you're about to change a behavior or something that is causing you the distress you feel, the only relief you'll probably feel is in this room where it feels
Right.
safe, because the insight has to amount to something you do to change the behaviors or environments, people, places, and things that are causing you that distress, hence your
Right.
gatekeepers. So why
Right.
insight alone doesn't create change? Tell me more.
So it's great to understand that. I'll use myself as an example. It's great to understand that I had set up this pattern because as I was a child, I was trying to protect myself. And now I'm 50 years old and I'm married and I'm repeating the same pattern. So the change comes from the hard question, which is, what are you afraid of? Okay, so that was the question that constantly kept coming back to. You have the story that if you are of service, if you do everything, you will not be abandoned. Okay. And if you get to the place where you're willing to, or if I, using myself as an example, I was willing to feel what it felt like as an 8-year-old child to be abandoned, that hurts. And that hurts a lot. And that's just one trauma that we hold on to. So it's not just the insight, oh yeah, you're doing this because when you were a child you were afraid you weren't safe. It's the willingness to go back and not be that child, but to take this person, to take, in my case, the 71-year-old woman, and go back to that 6 or 8-year-old child and say, I got you. I got you.
Mm.
You're okay.
There you go.
You're okay.
Mhm.
Look where we are. Look how we've made it. I mean, just saying that in my own body, I just feel chills because we have to, we have to bring, we have to bring the bodies together,
You have to
right?
bring them to know, and I always tell people, we're not leaving any portion of yourself behind.
Right.
Even though that the past is something you may not be proud of, it's very painful. There's a part of you that managed to survive that. And we need to honor that and bring that piece forward and not leave it behind as it's already felt abandoned. It is for us to
Absolutely.
reconcile all parts of you, which is something a lot of people struggle because they think if I'm evolving as a person, I should just let the past go. It's like the past has a purpose. It doesn't mean you should stand in it, but it does have a purpose. So what about those people, though, for instance, like I'm sure you heard people come into coaching, I've heard it in therapy. They'll come in the door and say, I feel stuck. I don't know what's going on. So I feel like a lot of people don't recognize when life is trying to tell them to move somewhere unexpected. What do you do with that when people don't recognize that themselves?
Well, I have to say, most of the clients that I get, most of the people that come to me, that's the first word out of their mouths. It's like, I'm stuck, or is this
See?
all there is? Is this as good as it
Is
gets,
this all?
right?
Is this good? Is this
And
as good as it gets?
this
Yes.
is as good as it gets. And in fact, in Lumina's journey in the fable, I actually have a little chapter about that because I had that moment myself in therapy when I said to my therapist, I said, what if this is as good as it gets? And her comment to me is she said, well, what if it is? And I don't know why, but her asking me that question back, I just broke into hysterical laughter because all I could think about was, well, if this is as good as it gets, then at least I know what's going on and I don't have to worry anymore. You know, so again, a lot of it is perspective. A lot of it
Mhm.
is one of the first questions that I always um, invite my clients to do is to notice and notice from the observer. So we all have an observer within us, and the observer is the one that, even if you're in a weird conversation or you're in a bar and you meet somebody, the observer is that detached energy inside us that's just noticing. Maybe
Taking it
it's
all in.
noticing, yeah, you're feeling giddy, or oh, he's a cute guy, or oh, check out that relationship, or wow, that guy seems totally unhooked. And so the observer
Uh-huh.
has this capacity to have non-judgmental awareness, right? And our conscious minds tend to look at things with a very judgmental or critical
Mhm.
point of view, like how
Mhm.
could I be so stupid, or why did I do this thing? And I always tell people, what if you looked at things with wonder and curiosity?
Oh.
And from the observer point, like we're not going to have any judgment, we're just going to observe what's happening in our lives right now with a little wonder and a little curiosity. Now I always put the caveat with people, you can't say to yourself with wonder and curiosity, I wonder why it is I'm so stupid. That one is not necessarily the wonder and curiosity. That's a little disguise. But you start with noticing, and you start with that unattached observer, and you start watching yourself, not with judgment, but with curiosity. Like, wow, isn't that interesting? I notice that every time I go into a conversation with my boss, my body automatically tightens up,
Mhm.
right? I wonder what that's all about. And then allow, this is the unexpected story coming through. We don't, we ask the question, but we don't give ourselves the answer. So we offer the question, just like me in Botswana. Where's the new language? Where will the new language come from? How will I know? What are the new words I should be embracing? And then my server comes at breakfast and tells me I'm about to be baptized. And it's like, holy crap. But here's
Okay.
one thing I want to point out. You have to be willing to receive. Okay.
Hmm.
You have to be willing to receive. And as women, especially, we're taught to give. We're taught our value is in our giving.
Mhm.
But if all you do is give, and you never receive, eventually the well runs dry. And a lot of women who come and say they're stuck are stuck because they have nothing left to give. The well is empty. And so one of the things we have to begin to teach is how to receive.
Yes. Yes. That's what I
How to
always ask
allow.
people. Yes.
Yeah.
I always ask people that. Are you ready to receive the blessings that you are asking for? People will ask for a lot of things, but they're not really ready to receive them when those things arrive. Hence, a point you made when you shared all your information with me, what it really means to get out of your own way.
Right. So then when we're in this place, when we're asking, are you ready to receive the blessings that you're asking for? Then this is where the observer comes in beautifully as the notice. Because if we hold the question in our mind, am I ready to receive the blessings I'm asking for? And the observer says, well, isn't that interesting? Because yesterday, so and so came to you and offered to take this load off, and you said, no, 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 it's okay, I can handle it. Did you notice that you were being given a gift and you didn't receive? So the noticing, the non-judgmental observer is a crucial piece in that receiving process, because the unexpected story is not available to us when we hold up the cross and say, no, 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 I can't take that.
Okay. So if a person is they're hearing this and they say, okay, I definitely know this is not the life I want. It's not the life I imagined for myself. I don't even know where to start. Am I rewriting? Should I tear up the whole manuscript of the story of my life because I don't like it? Can I just toss it away? I always tell people there is no do-overs, there's do better. Because you can't go back and change
Yeah,
the
it's
materials you were
true.
given. You know what I mean? You can't do it over. And you
Yeah,
don't probably want to do it over is the first thing.
you're
But
right.
it's do
You're
better.
absolutely right.
And even people struggle with the idea of doing better because often the doing better is hard. So if a person says, okay, I want to become the author. I want to start to write my story. I want to rewrite this narrative that I have that I've been living. Where do they start? Where do they begin?
I know sometimes I like to be the devil's advocate. And the first question I like to ask people is, do you believe in magic?
Okay.
That's a question that has a lot of interpretations. The unexpected story is always with us, every moment of the day. And to the extent that we believe in possibilities and we
Mhm.
believe in synchronicity, we believe in dreams, we believe that we deserve to receive, that we don't have to give in unequal measure to receiving. Magic is for me, and the book really speaks to that, that Lumina forgot her magic, and she had to go on a journey
Mhm.
to reclaim what was always there for her, but she had forgotten. And I think that speaks very much to the question that you're asking. It's not linear, and it's not the
Yeah.
10 steps. It's being willing to sit in the uncertainty with faith, trust, and belief that there is something greater than you pulling you forward. And are you okay with receiving, even if you don't know what you're about to receive?
It's interesting. You when you said magic, I'm a music person. And the first thing that popped in my head, you may not remember the song. I want to say it was by Olivia Newton-John. And the song is about magic. And the line is, you have to believe we are magic. Nothing can stand in our way. That's like the refrain of the song. And that instantly popped in my head. But something else that, and you saying all this, a couple things popped in. It's interesting how, as children, the world is willing, in most cases, if we're blessed and lucky, to breathe into children the possibilities of life. Like that story you talk about, Luna, makes me think about Moana, who Moana was a similar story of she didn't believe in herself, her value, but it took that journey for her to realize that she could be that saving, actually not a grace and action that was needed of her. And it's interesting how often we will breathe it into children's stories, but rarely as adults does anybody reaffirm that for you. So when I think about how to start or write Pulling a page from your book, or at least a talking point I got. I think if you stop and look at your life, what feels uncertain, messy, and disorganized is probably a place to begin to inventory what isn't working, to figure out what you want to work and how you want it to work. Am I heading down the right path?
Sometimes I think, now I'm a Virgo, so, messy and disorganized. I'm also an event planner, so messy and disorganized immediately kind of like,
It's your thing, right? No.
it's like, how's that possible? You can be messy and disorganized. And yet, there is something to be discovered when we allow ourselves to sit in discomfort. Like
Yes.
that place of, I've had, I mentioned my trip to Africa. What I didn't mention was I have an extremely whacked out back, and after 16 days of game drives, I came home and basically wound up in the hospital because my back was just not happy at all, period. And so I haven't really had a lot of organization in my life right now because I just don't have the capacity to do anything other than sit and write. And there's something charming about sitting in this disorganized environment of mine and going, you know what? It's good. It's
Though,
fine.
a little disorganization or chaos is not a bad thing. It just can't be the thing that leads your life, because that
Right.
gets very complicated and hard to navigate when there is not some structure. Structure matters, but it doesn't mean you have to have rigid structure. And when you
It
think
does.
about the life unexpected, if you're a person who has ever struggled with the idea that I can't be happy because of the narrative or the story that has been given to me, that was written for me by somebody else, never involved anything within it that was happiness or showed value. I think when people discover that you have to fire those writers of your story and you need to take over writing your episodes, because I feel like every day is an episode of your life. You know what I mean? And how you wake is going to be how you decide to live it. So when you fire the people who are writing your story and you become the primary writer, look how those scenes look and feel differently. Look at the things that you get to incorporate. And I often find that when people start to remove the things from their life that aren't happy, it often can be hard, uncomfortable. But the peace and happiness they begin to discover is that unexpected story that they often didn't even think was possible because it seems so far out of reach, is my thoughts. But if you could give my listeners a closing thought, what would it be?
I think I go back to the original premise that language is our most powerful magical spell. And the words that we use, the way we group them together, the way we express ourselves creates the map that we travel on. And if we're traveling on a journey that's not taking us where we want to go, look at the language that we use and ask ourselves, is there new words that will help me draft a new destination and a new map? Um,
Yes, about
that
the
would be it.
openness. Yes.
That's right.
Well,
That's right.
everybody, your ears should have perked up, especially if you're a person who's in therapy, you're into self-help, you like journaling. I took a peek um, at your website, theunexpectedstory.com, and I love the fact that obviously you can purchase the book there, but then you give people some tools, some companion tools. Like I'm going back because I see you talk about the two parts of the book. I think it's called the part 2 is the dragonfly.
The Dragonfly Path, yeah.
Yes.
So a couple of things. The book actually will be available on July 14th.
Okay.
You can get the pre-link on Amazon.com. If you go to my website, down at the bottom, theunexpectedstory.com /dragonfly,
Got
you
one.
can
Scan the code at the
see,
top
put your
here. This, if you
QR
scan
code.
that code at the top, that QR code will take you right to your page. So I try to make it easy for people.
Absolutely, you are on top of it. And if you go to /dragonfly, you can put in your information, your birth information, just like you would astrology short, and you will get a beautiful 7-page report that talks specifically about who you are and what your gifts and talents are, what some of the magical spells are that show up in your life advantageously, and perhaps, maybe not quite so advantageously. It's a really fun report, and you can get it for free.
And I saw that. I just wanted to be very accurate with my time of birth, and I couldn't remember it on the monies, so I have to do a little research on that one with my mom. But
Yeah, it's really,
or find my
really,
birth certificate, one of the two.
really important that it's accurate, because it really influences
It does make a difference.
the
It does.
outcome. Yeah.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much. They will be seeing you again, because our pre-conversation before the show shared some amazing stuff about even menopause and some of these things, because a lot of women, when they go through menopause, we need to have an unexpected story, because the struggle looks different once you cross over that mark, and we don't anticipate what life looks like maybe after being a parent and you're an empty nester, or you go through that hormonal change, which can turn your life upside down. And most people don't know that. Men, by the way, you get an upside down too. So it isn't just for women. But you said some things, I'm like, oh, I'm going to be wrapping that back into my menopause stuff, because I feel like people need to hear that. Well, Shannon, you have been an amazing guest. Like I said, you will be back. Definitely, I'm looking forward to grabbing the book. So everybody learn more about Shannon and The Unexpected Story. Make sure you go to the website, theunexpectedstory.com, or you can scan the QR code at the top. For all my fancy phone people are like, how can I scan it if I'm watching it on my phone, Maya? I said, well, last time I checked, I think you can use your phone at the same time and scan it. I had a little smarty pants who said that to me once. But anyways, and then I had to go research. Am I doing something that isn't feasible? It is though. But to me, love the story. And I think, honestly, as I said before, so many times children get the stories that we don't get as an adult. I think we need those subtle reminders about magic, because as children, we often can believe in magic, and we seem to think it doesn't exist anymore when we're adults. And I disagree with that. So thank you for coming on. Now look at that. There's somebody who I love my listeners. Somebody knew I was talking about them. I will not post it. But thank you for coming on. I look forward to definitely reading your book. And I'm going to tell people, if you're afraid of therapy, because some people are afraid of it, they don't realize it's their safe space and it's all about you and nobody else, then I would say use these different tools that people put in front of you that can still give you that self-discovery. Because if you're feeling unfulfilled in your life, if you're feeling stuck, guess what? You don't have to stay in that position, because when we become adults, what I feel, Shannon, is we make a choice to stay stuck. We make that choice. The move might be hard, but we can make it if we're dedicated to wanting that life beyond what we just imagined.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a big one. Well, thank you. And until next time, you know what? I will hear more about your stories on the next go around when I have you on.
Okay.
All righty. Bye-bye. Yes, everybody, amazing guest. Go to the website and check it out. There's some really great nuggets on there. And trust me, we didn't even break the surface, but it's worth you exploring, because if you're struggling, if you think that you can't change the trajectory that you are on right now in your life, you're wrong. You can't. But here's the thing, you don't, and you probably shouldn't try to do it alone. So whether you get the book, The Unexpected Story by Shannon, or you jump into therapy, either way, it's a chance for you to change your trajectory more than anything else. So everyone, as always, I thank you for listening to the episode. The whole purpose, of my podcast is to help you identify your ambition and harness that motivation to help you to pull back that veil of self-doubt and sabotage that so many of us have, to begin the life that we want on a daily basis. So if you are a, say, returning or first time, listener, by now you should know if you've missed an episode or you need to rewatch this episode, it's okay. You can always find me on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Audible, Spotify. Pretty much, if it's a podcast platform, you can find me. Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition. You can make your life super easy and just subscribe to my YouTube channel, M.A.Y.A Speaks to You, and you'll always know there was an episode. And by the way, I finally got my act together. So all my social media handles are M.A.Y.A Speaks to You, Facebook, Instagram, and X. So you don't have to, wonder about that. But of course, I have the website. See, I make this easy for everybody. All you have to do is go to maya-speaks.com, and everything Maya is right there. But here's one better, everybody. I'm always working hard. There's the app. So you don't even have to overthink this. You can always get the app, which you can find in the Apple Store. You can find it in the Google Store. Pretty much wherever you get your apps from, the Amazon Store, you can find it there. And voila, download it and you can take me on the go. So you can find Everything from, you can watch the episodes, you can just listen to the episodes, as well as, if by now you don't know, I have the Me on Pause blog, which is my blog that's dedicated to menopause. And I also have a weekly inspirational that I put out there as well. I give you one singular thought that I want you to have to process. And those are getting better and better. And I'm kind of elevating what I'm doing with those things. So you can always get the app. Apple Store, Google Play, and Amazon is where you find my app. All right, everybody. Remember what I always say. Until next time, remember, your present becomes your past and your future. Now listen to this. And people kind of scratch their head a little bit, but think about it. And your future is no more. So the key thing is to live every single day to the fullest. Make the most of it. All right, everybody. I'll see you next time. And it only gets better with every future episode. But stay safe, stay amazing, and more importantly, stay believing in you.
Whether you're on the go or listening on your cell phone, tablet, or laptop, you can find the show in the iTunes, Google, and iHeartRadio platforms.
With all due respect, I believe this is going to be our finest hour.
Just search M.A.Y.A, My Ambition, Your Ambition, and get ready to be inspired and motivated to harness your ambition.